Coming up on the Purposeful Podcast. A lot of the folks that are complaining the loudest about student loan debt repayment are folks that are college educated. Maybe they even have master's degrees or PhDs. And, you know, I'm sorry that you have a lot of student loan debt, but asking the people at the lowest end of the income earning spectrum to suffer so that you don't have to pay your loans back, I just don't see where there's any kind of sense or reason or fairness in that. And I think it's immoral.
You're listening to the Purposeful Podcast.
Welcome to the Purposeful Podcast. I'm Matt.
I am Saki.
We're very glad to have you here. And this week, I'd like to start by letting you know where you can find us. If you enjoy what you're hearing on the Purposeful Podcast, but maybe video isn't the best format for you, then we'd encourage you to pull us up on your favorite podcast directory. In fact, we're available almost anywhere you can listen to a podcast. So look us up, the Purposeful Podcast, and listen to us while you're doing your yard work or while you're doing your hobby, whatever you might think would be a good time to listen to a podcast. If you do enjoy the video format, you can find our videos posted to our Facebook page, which is at Convergent Digital Media. You can find them on YouTube, and you can find them on Rumble. So search for us there. And then, of course, we'd love to visit with you and chat with you on our locals page, which is thepurposefulpodcast.locals.com. And of course, you can always reach us by email. You can do that by sending your requests, your messages, your thoughts to us at thepurposefulpodcast@convergentdigitalmedia.com. So thank you for listening to that little spiel. We appreciate it. But more importantly, please connect with us. We would love to hear from you. For those of you that have, thank you so very much. This is the reason we're here, is for you. So at this point, let me go ahead and run over our agenda for this week's episode. We are going to cover a lot of ground as usual. So we're going to talk about our giving back segment. And this week we're going to focus on giving in our home state of Florida. We're going to talk about the savings hack of the week, and Saki has some good stuff for you there. And then we're going to go over some current events to keep you informed on what's going on that you need to know about and how it impacts you. So with that, we're going to go ahead and kick this out to the intro, and then we're going to get started.
You're listening to the Purposeful Podcast with Matt Fiebig and Saki Filios.
We're going to start this week with our giving back segment. Now, last week, we focused on the giving habits, the charitable giving habits of all Americans. And the numbers were absolutely just mind-blowing how charitable Americans are. And you think about the needs. You know, obviously, the last couple of years have been very tough on folks with COVID and, various levels of people losing their jobs or not able to go into their jobs, having their kids home, all kinds of difficulties that no one was really expecting. So the fact is that, our fellow Americans responded to those needs at record-setting levels, and that was very good news. This week, we're taking a little bit more of a deeper dive into the numbers specific to the state of Florida, which is our home state. So it turns out that Floridians are actually above average in terms of charitable giving. So that's exciting because, obviously we're proud of our state. But here are some of the key numbers that I will give to you. And then Psyche, I'll ask you to respond with your thoughts after we hear those. So number one, most Floridians give to charities. So it turns out that somewhere around 7 out of every 10 households in Florida made a charitable donation in 2021. And of those, about 3/4 donated to organizations that are based here in the state of Florida. So keeping the giving close to home. Over half of households reported volunteering in 2021, and that was actually very common among younger Floridians and also those households that have a high net worth. Now, nearly all Floridians help other Floridians directly, neighbors, friends, whatever the case may be. Almost 9 out of 10 households reported participating in informal philanthropy, and that kind of thing includes giving directly to someone in need that they know personally. And then I guess where I go from here is I need to make sure I give credit to the folks who published this report, which was the Florida Nonprofit Alliance. So they did this in cooperation with the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy and the Jesse Ball DuPont Fund. So these organizations come together, they look at the numbers, and those are the numbers that they came up with. So now that you've heard just what a giving people we are here in Florida, what do you think about that, Psyche?
Well, I guess all that sunshine we have around here makes everyone happier.
Hey, the Sunshine State.
Now, you know what? In all seriousness, that's awesome, isn't it? I mean, this everything comes down to us giving back to our communities, and for everybody, that's different. You and I both give back. It's high on our list. We believe in it, and there's things we do that uh, differ from each other and differ from other people. But we all have something we can give back, whether it's time, money, skill set, and to hear that 70% of respondents give back to their local community, that makes me proud. It's higher than I suspected it would be. I don't know why, but it makes me proud to hear that.
Yeah, I really feel the same way. It it makes me think about the fact that you hear a lot of news stories about loneliness, about people feeling disconnected, about the trends are that people are moving more and more into digital interaction and less in personal interaction. And obviously here we are on a digital format reaching people digitally, but this is not the primary way that you establish relationships. But when you're actually seeing as many as 9 in 10 households that are giving at a personal level to someone in need, now of course that might be handing $20 to somebody on the side of the road, but it also may be, hey, I heard that there's a friend that I have that is going through a rough patch, or I know somebody at church who had a need. In fact, that reminds me of something that I experienced this last year through my place of worship. Um, we had a young lady join our fellowship. She moved to Florida from California, and very determined, hardworking, got a job, had no car. She was biking her way to work. So the local connect group that she was a part of decided that they wanted to raise some money and buy her a car because they were so impressed with her work ethic. So they went ahead and did that. So, that's an example of people that see a need, they see a person who is a good risk to take. Let's throw some money at not a small gift, really, if you think about a car. And in fact, her car might be worth more now than it was when they bought it for her. But that's an awesome example. But that's the kind of thing that people here are doing. So it's really neat to see that, to be a part of that, and to know that it's not just an isolated event at the local level. This is the kind of thing that's going on around the state. So kudos to you, Floridians. You
That's
really are
awesome.
putting sunshine in the Sunshine State. So
Spreading the sunshine.
that's right. So that is this week's Giving Back segment. Now we're going to kick it over to you so you can share with us your savings hack this week.
Yeah. Well, this week we got a great one, I think, and I came across this by doing it myself the other day and tried to kind of do a little housekeeping myself, a little financial housekeeping. So this week's savings hack is go over your active subscriptions. You know, we live in a society that just about everything we do charges us monthly now. Or some of that's annually. You have the option of paying annually, but go over them as well. So any active subscriptions you have, whether that's streaming services, software services, gym memberships, cable, cell phones, any of it. And a good way to do that is I would say is look at the last 3 or 4 months worth of bank statements and just go through everything you're being charged and cancel the ones you don't use, or and even your cell phone, maybe shop that around. But you know, an article came out that I was reading the other day said that the average person spends around $350 a year on subscriptions that are not used. And that's the average person. So I suspect that's obviously going to be higher for a lot of folks. So you're talking $50 a month or better you could save if that number's higher. So go through your bank statement, see what's being charged, go through your subscriptions. If you're not using Hulu, or if you have redundant streaming accounts, you know, that we've had a lot more players come into the market. So maybe you need to analyze what streaming accounts you're using, so what services. You may have Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, Paramount Plus. If you've got 4 or 5 of them, odds are you have some crossover there. So check that out and get rid of the ones you don't need.
Yeah. Well, I know if households generally or anything like my household, then my wife has a couple of her favorite channels, and seriously, it's like two or three, and then I have two or three that I like to watch, and that's it.
Yeah.
So if you keep going back to the same two or three channels, and maybe you only use these other streaming services once in a while, maybe you can live without them altogether and save yourself. I mean, look, $10 a month, that's $120 a year. It may not seem like a lot, but you do that 3 or 4 times, and boy, it starts to add up quick. Just think about putting that in an interest-bearing investment account or savings account, and where that winds up after 5 or 10 years. You're talking some
Yeah.
mega bucks.
Exactly. And, you know, Netflix, I believe, came out the other day and said that they were raising their rates again, their monthly rates. Yeah, I believe I may be wrong, and it's $20 a month, I think.
Wow.
So a lot of them are raising their rates. I was actually talking to somebody the other day, and this goes along with checking your active subscriptions. They were paying $70 a month for a streaming TV service, but they actually said the same thing you just said, which was kind of ironic, that there's only 2 or 3 channels they wanted, and they happened to be sports channels. This was a guy, and he liked his live sports. And I said, well, who doesn't like your live sports? I'm with you on that. That's pretty much the only thing I want to see. And it turns out, though, you can subscribe to some individual channels that provide the live sports. And instead of $70 a month, you're spending $15 a month. So that's, $55 a month just on that one service. So it's a pretty big big hack there, savings that you could have.
Yeah. And obviously it's a decent commitment. You may need a few hours to go
Yeah.
through and make sure you're still subscribed to some of the stuff you think you are, or find stuff that, oh, I went through my credit card statement and lo and behold, I'm subscribed to 3 things I just had completely forgotten about altogether.
Yeah.
It's easy in the busyness that comes with a normal life in America to not take the time, that is needed to look over those things. But because they are continuous subscriptions that charge you on a monthly basis. It's really worth, I mean, personally, I think every once a year at least,
Yeah.
take a couple of hours, just review it, figure out what's going on, where you can maybe cut back and improve your financial efficiency, because
Yeah.
those things do add up.
Yeah. And one more thing that goes along with that, that just popped in my head actually, is subscriptions that auto renew. So a lot of us, a big thing the past year, 6 months to years, you're seeing a lot of these media providers, everything's becoming a fee service, right? Whether it's Barron's, it's your local newspaper, whatever, that your free information is kind of going by the wayside little by little, and you're having to pay for the information you want, at least credible information. So you'll get a teaser rate, and a lot of our listeners probably know what I'm talking about. You'll get a teaser rate of $6 for 6 months, or $1 for 30 days, or who knows, whatever, $3 for a month. But once that goes out, they're real good about locking in your credit card, and in the fine print they talk about it will automatically renew. Well, you may have a new subscription that you don't use anymore that you just forgot you had. But odds
Right.
are it probably auto renewed at a much higher price than you thought you had it at.
Exactly. Now, that actually reminds me of a handy trick that you can incorporate. If you sign up for one of those, and say you've got a 30-day trial period, or even a 60 or 90-day trial period, put in your phone calendar, and make sure you've got your notifications turned on, but put that event in your calendar 3 days or so before it expires, and put in there, the trial period on this service expires in 3 days. Well, you're probably going to forget about it, and then boom, it's going to pop up on your notifications on your phone one morning, and you're going to go, I remember. Do I want to keep that or not? And if the answer is no, you're almost certainly going to have to go manually turn it off.
That is
But
a
you'll
great
catch
idea.
it before you get billed for the next full service period. And not everybody bills on a monthly basis. You might get billed for 6 months or 12 months. So you don't want that to happen for sure.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's a great idea. I highly recommend doing that and just staying on top of them, and you'll see a big savings out of it.
Well, that brings us to our current events for this week. So a lot of stuff going on. Again, unfortunately, I wish we could bring you better news, but unfortunately, the news right now with the economy just is not extraordinarily positive. I think the big event of the day is that the Federal Reserve announced that it's very seriously considering raising interest rates by half a percentage point, um, or what they would call 50 basis points at the next opportunity to raise rates. Now we know that the Fed has previously announced that they're targeting somewhere between about 1.5 and 1.75% increase in interest rates over the course of 2022. But their first swing at it was just a quarter point. The fact that they're just a couple of weeks later talking about a half of a point rate increase, maybe that raises some questions as to how concerned they really are about inflation. I think that initially they were trying to calm the markets down by setting out expectations that, hey, interest rates are definitely going to go up, and hopefully people understanding that would kind of factor that in and start to behave ahead of time as if interest rates were definitely going to go up. The question is, are the rates going to go up high enough to make a substantial impact on the inflationary rates, which just continue to go higher and higher? So, That brings me back to the fundamentals. And if you've heard this before, then you'll be somewhat familiar with it. But if you haven't, it's worth understanding. There are some macroeconomic factors that contribute to inflation. So, big picture things. One of those is government spending. The higher the spending, the more the government is borrowing, which is effectively like printing money and putting it into the economy. So that is causing inflationary pressure. Another thing is the supply chain. So obviously, the war in Ukraine is continuing. There are issues across all kinds of materials and products, including wheat, including precious metals, including oil. So this is impacting the supply that's available to purchase. And obviously, if you've got high demand and low supply, then you're going to see prices up. And then the third big factor is monetary policy with the Federal Reserve. So the last several years, they've been pursuing what's known as an easy money policy. They've been purchasing bonds and therefore injecting cash into the economy. And they've also kept interest rates very low, which allows banks to inject cash into the economy by making loans cheap. So, what we're seeing is that we have no end in sight right now with the supply chain issues. So, those are going to continue indefinitely until something changes. As far as government spending goes, the Biden administration proposed a $5.8 trillion budget for this year. So I think it's safe to say that we can't reasonably expect government spending to go down at a significant level. So really, that leaves the Fed as the last effort to get inflation under control, the last area where that might happen. And so, for one, when I see that they're looking at being a little more aggressive with the rate increases, that tells me that they're more concerned about inflation than maybe they have been. Because when you take big swings at the interest rates, that's what wakes people up, and employers stop hiring because they know that money's about to get tighter. People who are considering purchasing vehicles or homes, maybe they pull back and they put that on the shelf for a little while because they know that the interest rates are going up. So, that lends to the prospects of a recession. And that's the fear with the Fed raising rates too quickly, is that you might cause a recession. So the fact that they're looking at being more aggressive and risk pushing the economy into a recession tells me that they're very concerned about inflation. So let me kick this over to you, because I put an awful lot out there, and let's get your feedback and your thoughts, Psyche.
Yeah, so I was surprised about that. Like you said, they've come out and they said, what, 6 times or so at every meeting they'd planned to raise it 0.25%. To do more than that definitely signals that they're more concerned with inflation, even though the risk of making us or putting us into a recession is greater the faster they move that interest rate up. So what that means to me is they see something we don't see, and they're really trying to slow down just our everyday price. And look, we've talked about this before, where the inflation indexes are coming out at 7, 8, 9%. Well, we know real estate's around 20% year over year inflation, and that could go higher depending where you are. Well, I think they're looking at that, and they're looking at oil, and they're looking at certain food products, and they're saying we have to slow that down. We can't survive. What's the outcome if we have another 20% increase in these categories? And that may be worse than the alternative, right? Maybe we do need to slow this economy down into a halt and somehow fix inflation. Typically, when you raise the rates in the real estate market, prices go down. Money's harder to lend out, harder to get for the individual consumer. So it'll be interesting. I can see where they're coming from and wanting to raise it faster, but that definitely signals to me that they're more concerned about inflation than they've previously let on.
The president announced today that they were going to continue, his administration is going to extend the moratorium on student loan repayments. Those were fixing to kick back in on May 1st, and in fact, we actually did a segment on that a couple of episodes ago. But the Biden administration today said that they're going to defer those payments until at least August 31st. So that's 4 more months that folks that have student loans are not going to have to pay those student loans. So, the question then is, well, how does that relate to what we just talked about with inflation being a concern? And the reason that is a factor is because, again, it's a macroeconomic event. You've got people that owe trillions of dollars in student loan debt. And so when you factor that down to the individual level, the average borrower is paying back several hundreds of dollars a month in student loan payments. Well, if you don't have to spend those hundreds of dollars a month paying back your loans, then you can spend those hundreds of dollars a month in some other area of the economy. And so having that cash available to spend elsewhere is actually keeping demand artificially high, which is keeping a certain amount of pressure on prices, because if they were paying their loans, obviously they wouldn't be able to go do things like buy electronics or clothing or spend that money on a vacation or travel or any of things like that. So that does play a role. 2 years ago, when folks were experiencing lockdowns with COVID and they didn't know when they were going to get back to work, well, maybe it made sense then to suspend student loan payments for a little while until things could stabilize. But I think at this stage, people have a good understanding of where they are financially. And I think there could be some significant consequences to kicking the can down the road with this. What do you think, Saki?
I agree. So I was surprised by this one. I haven't been surprised too often by moves that our government has made lately, but this one caught me off guard. I really thought that they wouldn't, kick the can down the road, so to speak, any further with this, and they'd have people start paying back. So we have to remember these are government-backed student loans we're talking about. So the government is telling people, don't pay us back. And statistically, they know that they've got studies on this out the wazoo. They know that statistically, the majority of Americans will not save that money. So they're going to spend it. And it's going to go into the economy. And just like you say, it's kind of an artificial way. It's not much different than them printing money and giving it to you, right? Instead of them printing more money, they're just telling you the obligations you currently have, you don't have to pay and go do something else with it. So that's actually part of the problem at this point. I can understand why this was done to start with, and that's okay. I can agree with that, with deferring them during the onset of the pandemic. But you've got to start paying your obligations back, and that goes with mortgages or anything else, student loans. So I'm a little surprised by that. I wonder if that Federal Reserve isn't compensating for that. Do you know if this news came out before the Federal Reserve news came out of the 0.5% hike?
I actually do not know which one came out first.
Okay. I'd be curious to see which one came out first, because I wonder if the Federal Reserve was kind of reactionary and said, oh, well, hold on. We're actually creating a little more inflation, so maybe we need to compensate for that.
That's a possibility. I can't say that that's not the case for sure.
Yeah.
I think that people who are smarter than I am are making some of these decisions, but I know looking at this situation from where we sit, um, it's a concern.
Yeah.
And when you couple the student loan debt deferment with the $5.8 trillion proposed federal government budget for this year, um, that's it's intimidating. I feel a little bit for Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, because he's a public figure who um, I think some of his political friends are setting him up to be the fall guy here and to take
Yeah.
responsibility for the economic conditions because politicians are not going to be happy about it. And of course, the truth of the matter is that fiscal responsibility went out the window a long time ago in terms of one party or the other advocating for fiscal responsibility. Anymore, it's we both want to spend. It's just, one party wants to spend on this set of services and the other party wants to spend on this set of services. So you'll hear the folks on the political right bemoan the fact that the military is getting cut back even though there's a $5.8 trillion budget. And if the roles were reversed, you'd be hearing all the moans about all the poor people who aren't going to get their social security that they need because the right is putting so much into the defense budget. And it's like, yeah, well, is there any voice out there that is saying, maybe we need to figure out how to cut spending across the board so that we're not, borrowing so much money? It is remarkable how much money the federal government has borrowed in the last 12 years. And that's, you know, presidents of different parties and congresses of different parties. Both parties are responsible for where we are today, and they're not stopping. So sorry, Jerome Powell. You're going
Yeah.
to have to do some things that are not popular if you're going to get this under control, or else it's going to have to be the next person in that role who's going to have to do it. But I don't envy that person, whoever it is.
Yeah, I agree with you. He has a tough job either way. Kind of feels like he wasn't set up for success. And
No, not at all.
yeah, and you're right. Going back to Bush in what, '07. I think it was the end of '07. It might have been '08, when he passed that first massive bill. Um, when Obama was coming in office. Ever since then, it's pretty much been free money policy after free money policy. So it doesn't matter what party you're in, but um, you've seen what it's done at this point, and obviously we can't keep going like this. So
Yeah.
um,
And
we've got to address the free money, and people have to start paying back their obligations. If you're not smart enough, I'm definitely not smart enough to understand the big ramifications of it. But you know, it's you have these government backed loans, money's being paid to these institutions for your education, and you're not paying it back. So you've got something for free, which I don't understand how that helps anybody really. I mean, you should pay your obligations and let's move on with life.
Well, that's the thing. It, it you're really asking somebody else to pay your debt for you. So if you're one of those who theoretically had a student loan forgiven, well, let's say you had $150,000 in student loan debt, which is high, but it's not absurd. A lot of folks have at least that much. A lot of folks have a lot
Mhm.
more. So if you have that forgiven and you have a federally backed loan that's forgiven, well, what does federally backed mean? That means backed by the US government which is either going to get that money through raising taxes or through borrowing the money from the Treasury, or from the Federal Reserve, which is inflationary. It's basically like printing money. Well, inflation is a tax that is not a progressive tax. The US income tax system is a progressive system. So the folks that earn the least amount of money either pay no taxes or they pay very small taxes. As you earn more and more money, you pay a higher and higher percentage of what you earn in taxes. That's what a progressive tax system is. Inflation is almost the opposite of that, because people who earn the least amount of money are paying a much higher percentage of what they earn on the basics, like transportation, shelter, and then your food, your groceries, those kind of household consumables. Well, if 90% of what you make goes to those three things, and the prices on those three categories of goods goes up by 20%, you're getting crushed. You are absolutely getting crushed. Someone at the top end of the income earning spectrum, okay, they can handle that. They've got a lot of discretionary income. So the irony to me is that a lot of the folks that are complaining the loudest about student loan debt repayment are folks that are college educated. Maybe they even have master's degrees or PhDs. And, you know, I'm sorry that you have a lot of student loan debt, but asking the people at the lowest end of the income earning spectrum to suffer so that you don't have to pay your loans back, I just don't see where there's any kind of sense or reason or fairness in that. And I think it's immoral. So, that's my soapbox moment.
Well, I agree, and just so people understand, they're federally backed, but they're made by institutions that are private institutions. They're not government institutions. So the money still has to get reimbursed to them. So when we say we cancel your student loan debt, someone still has to get paid back for that. So it's not like we're saying, oh, the money your debt has been forgiven, nobody gets paid. No, that's not really how it works. Now, I'm not saying that these student loan companies are on the up and up and they're the best companies in the world, because they're kind of remind me of these credit card companies and stuff like that as well. But still, you've got hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of local people employed by these companies who are good people. Sure. And they try to do things the right way. So what's going to happen if, one, they have to get paid back, and two, what's the end result of that? I mean, how long can they keep working on this deferment, because money's not coming in? So there's a lot of factors in play here with that.
There are. And it really gets to the bigger question of, when do we take our medicine, right? I mean,
Yep.
We've had excuse after excuse after excuse now for 20 years, really since 9/11 and the terrorist attacks that took down the Trade Center towers in New York. Okay, well, now we have to go to war. So we spend 20 years in Afghanistan and almost that long in Iraq, and put trillions of dollars into that effort. And what do we have to show for it? And then you've got one crisis after the other where, the housing crisis in 07, 08, and we got to bail out every major corporation in America, it seems like. And of course, that's not true, but it felt like it. I mean, there were a lot of banks that were too big to fail. There were automakers that would have gone bankrupt had they not been bailed out. There were airlines that would have gone bankrupt had they not been bailed out. Well, where did that money come from? It was the federal government was writing the check to cover the debt default. And now we're talking about student loans and doing the same thing. And it's like, okay, we have a fundamental issue here, which is individual and corporate responsibility. At an individual level, if we borrow money and we pledge to repay the money that we borrow, we should do that. Now, if one person out of a million defaults on their debt, it's not going to devastate the economy. But if all 1 million people who borrow money get that money forgiven, and the federal government writes a big fat check to all the banks to cover what otherwise would be a default situation on those loans, well, then you have inflation because you have
Yep.
a wash of money supply that enters into the economy, and that hurts everybody. you know so if if we keep kicking the can down the road, I think we're going to get more and more of what we're seeing right now. And I don't think that it has a good end. I know that you and I are both optimists over the long run, but I am of the opinion that, hey, you make a mistake, you atone for it, and you start over again. And I think we're due for a reset with some of these economic practices. We just need to say, okay, this is where it stops. We need to start paying our bills back. We need to cut back on some spending, and we need to kind of get our house back in order financially so that we can have a better and brighter future, which is what we want for us and for our kids.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree 100% with that statement. And, you know, everyone's heard the line, nip it in the bud. Well, you want to get rid of the problem before it festers, before it grows.
Right.
And that's what it feels like we're doing here. And you and I are both in agreement with that. And we do need to get our house in order. And who knows, maybe the Federal Reserve knows something we don't know. To circle back to that, maybe that's why they want to raise that interest rate a little faster and maybe kind of force our hand a bit on that.
Well, I mean, if we're not going to get a reduction in demand any other way, then a recession might be the only way. And
Yeah.
if you see us go into a recession, you are going to see demand go down. So that would hopefully help relieve some of the inflationary pressure. But um, you just hate to see the most painful outcome come to fruition because the leadership across business and government, and honestly, even people in their own households, they don't want to take responsibility for their own choices and their own behaviors. And it's like, okay, well, if you don't, then we will all collectively suffer, and we
Yeah.
will. So I think the main thing that I want to end the show with, from my perspective, is to just reiterate to our viewers and our listeners, you can't control what everybody else is doing, but you can control what you do. And the truth is, there are going to be opportunities if you do things the right way, if you save your money, if you invest your money wisely, if you spend less than you make consistently over a long period of time, there are going to be opportunities for you to take advantage of the situation. One person's loss is almost always another person's gain. And I hate to put it in those terms, but the fact of the matter is, there will be some winners and there will be some losers as this all plays out. And if you want to be a winner, then get your house in order, get ready to take advantage of these opportunities, and then when they come, pounce on them. There's going to be a lot of opportunity to take advantage of this. So just get ready.
Yeah. 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 And I guess if there's one thing I could close with is it's along the same lines, but it's personal responsibility. And I don't want people to wait for the government to solve their problems, because they're going to wait a long time, right? That's not what they're there for. They're not there to solve our issues and create our lifestyle. I want our listeners and everyone to increase their financial IQ and take personal responsibility and create a life where these outside circumstances actually don't affect you too bad. So when times are real good, or if times are not so good, you've still got the cushions you need and the capital you need, and you've set your debt levels up accordingly, and you're investing like you should, where you don't have these wild swings in your personal life. So
Yeah.
that's what I would like to see happen. And it's just taking control, right? Just owning your life.
That's exactly right. And sometimes that means confronting some uncomfortable truths about, the way
Yeah.
you have been doing things. But if you're not honest about what you have been doing, then you're not going to change. And if you're doing things the right way, you don't need to change necessarily. But even for someone who's doing things the right way most of the time, there's always an opportunity to improve. But
Right.
it brings to mind, there's a parable from the Bible that talks about building your house on a solid foundation versus building your house on sand. And, take heed, because the storm is coming, right? And if you built your house on a foundation of sand, when that storm comes and the waves crash and the wind blows, your house is going to go down. And that happens every single time there's a recession, every single time we go through the boom and then the bust. When the bust cycle comes, a lot of people have their house blown down. So be the one who builds your house on a foundation of stone. You'll be in good shape. So, with that, we're going to call this an episode. So, congratulations. You have made it through another one. We appreciate it. Once again, if you want to know more, if you like our content, please subscribe. Listen on your favorite podcast directory. Hit the subscribe button. Leave us positive feedback. Let us hear from you. You can do that by contacting us at the Purposeful Podcast at convergentdigitalmedia.com. If you have questions about how to get your financial house in order, let us know. We'd be happy to share our thoughts with you. If you have ideas for future segments on the show, let us know. We'd love to talk about things that are interesting to you. But with that, we'll call it a day, and hope to see you next time on the Purposeful Podcast.